It begins in silence. For years, the narcissist relied on the same weapons: guilt, flattery, rage, charm. They cycled through them like a magician pulling out familiar tricks, each one designed to provoke a reaction. They knew that if they could make you defend yourself, apologize, explain, or even cry, they still held the strings. But today, something is different. The words fall flat. The accusations echo in the room, unanswered. The flattery no longer glitters, and the anger, once so explosive, now feels almost theatrical. Because you, the empath, do not move. You do not feed. You no longer care. The narcissist notices first in the eyes. Where they once found fire, whether of hurt, of love, of loyalty, there is now only calm detachment. That stillness terrifies them more than any shouted argument ever did. Rage can be fought. Tears can be manipulated. Explanations can be twisted. But silence? Silence is fatal to their power. Carl Jung wrote that power is never absolute. It requires participation. A tyrant without subjects is nothing but a lonely actor rehearsing lines in an empty theater. In the same way, the narcissist's domination exists as long as the empath continues to play the assigned role: the giver, the forgiver, the endless well of validation. The moment the empath withdraws, the dynamic collapses. The game ends. But to the narcissist, this collapse feels like death. Their identity has always depended on mirrors, on seeing themselves reflected in the admiration, fear, or devotion of others. You were their clearest mirror, the one who could reflect back the illusion of greatness, of victimhood, of superiority. And when that mirror turns blank, they face something they have spent their entire life avoiding: the emptiness inside. So, they try harder. First comes the guilt. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Then the flattery. You're the only one who truly understands me, the only one who makes me feel alive. When those fail, the mask cracks and rage surges forward. You've changed, you're cold, you're ungrateful. You'll regret this. But you do not flinch. You have finally stepped outside the performance. And the narcissist realizes, perhaps for the first time, that their arsenal is useless against someone who no longer participates. This is the panic. Not because they have lost you as a person, though they may scream those words, but because they have lost their control. They're not grieving love. They're grieving power. The chain they wrapped around you now lies slack on the ground, and they cannot pick it up again without your consent. Jung would call this moment a rupture in the unconscious contract. Every relationship has unspoken rules, unconscious bargains that sustain it. In the narcissist-empath dynamic, the bargain is cruelly simple. The empath sacrifices, and the narcissist consumes. But when the empath awakens and refuses to play, the unconscious bargain dissolves. What remains is only the raw truth. One person who cannot live without control, and another who has finally chosen freedom. The silence stretches. The narcissist feels it as suffocation, but you feel it as air, the first real breath in years. And though the narcissist will fight, plead, and rage to pull you back into the game, deep down they already know the moment you stopped caring was the moment their reign ended. Because power can only exist where it is fed. And when the empath starves the shadow withers. To understand why the narcissist begins to unravel when the empath detaches, we need to look beneath the surface, at the hidden mechanics of control that power their behavior. Narcissists are not simply cruel for the sake of cruelty. Their entire existence is built on a fragile structure, the constant need for validation, attention, and projection. Without these, they're hollow. With them, they feel temporarily inflated, powerful, alive. Carl Jung warned that what we call narcissism is not only arrogance, but an unconscious dependency. The narcissist depends on others to carry the weight of their shadow, all the insecurity, shame, and emptiness they cannot bear to face in themselves. Rather than owning this darkness, they project it outward. And who better to receive it than the empath? The one who listens deeply, forgives endlessly, and believes they can heal what is broken. This projection is the first mechanism of control. The narcissist takes their hidden flaws, weakness, selfishness, fear of abandonment, and casts them onto the empath. Suddenly, the empath is told they are the selfish one, the needy one, the difficult one. Gaslighting is not random cruelty. It is a psychic survival strategy. By convincing the empath to carry the shadow, the narcissist avoids collapsing under its weight. The second mechanism is attention. For the narcissist, attention is not just pleasant, it is oxygen. Praise, arguments, devotion, even anger, all of it feeds them. This is why they often provoke conflict. They would rather be hated than ignored, because hate is still a form of engagement, still proof that they matter. Jung described this hunger as archetypal. The ego that has not integrated the shadow must constantly seek mirrors in others. Without a mirror, it feels like vanishing. The third mechanism is dependency disguised as superiority. Narcissists act as if they do not need anyone, but in truth, they are profoundly dependent on others. Their superiority is a mask, a performance staged to cover the fact that without others' emotional labor, they cannot regulate their fragile self-image. The empath becomes both the stagehand and the audience, propping up the performance while applauding it. Together, these mechanics create a prison. The empath becomes trapped in a cycle, trying harder, giving more, explaining endlessly, hoping that one day the narcissist will appreciate the sacrifice. But that day never comes, because the mechanics of control are designed to perpetuate themselves. Every act of care only strengthens the narcissist's dependence and deepens the empath's exhaustion. And this is where Jung's insight becomes crucial. He taught that projection cannot survive without agreement. If you refuse to accept the qualities projected onto you, the spell breaks. If you stop feeding attention, positive or negative, the hunger grows unbearable, but it cannot be satisfied. If you see through the mask of superiority and recognize the dependency beneath it, the illusion of power collapses. This is why the empath's detachment is so devastating. It does not simply deprive the narcissist of comfort, it dismantles the entire psychic machinery. Without a willing host, the projections return to sender. Without emotional engagement, attention dries up. Without someone to believe the performance, superiority shrivels into insecurity. The narcissist, of course, senses this collapse long before they admit it. Their panic is not random. It is the terror of a starving system. They lash out, escalate, or cling desperately, because deep down they know their control was never real. It was borrowed energy, sustained only by the empath's participation. And this is the truth Jung leaves us with. The shadow feeds where it is allowed. The empath, by stepping back, by no longer caring, exposes the hidden mechanics of control for what they are: fragile, dependent, unsustainable. The moment the empath refuses to serve as the narcissist's mirror, the entire illusion begins to fracture. For empaths, the breaking point rarely arrives in a single dramatic moment. It is not usually one fight, one betrayal, or one manipulation that awakens them. It is the slow accumulation of years, small cuts, invisible burdens, endless nights of self-blame, until finally, something inside cracks. What was once a well of infinite patience now feels like a dry riverbed. And with that dryness comes a revelation. I cannot save them, and I don't need to. At first, this realization feels cruel. Empaths are conditioned, almost programmed, to believe that their worth lies in giving. From childhood, many learned that love must be earned through sacrifice. Their gift of deep feeling becomes a curse when it convinces them that enduring suffering is noble, that healing others is their destiny. So when they meet the narcissist, they unconsciously accept the role, the healer, the forgiver, the one who will pour endlessly until the other is finally full. But the narcissist's hunger is bottomless. No matter how much is given, it vanishes into a void. And the empath, despite every effort, begins to feel hollow. There comes a morning when they wake up and realize they are exhausted in ways that no sleep can cure. The laughter that once came easily feels forced. The warmth they once carried feels like ash. And in that exhaustion, a deeper truth emerges. This is not love. It is self-destruction. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of reclaiming the self from unconscious entanglement. In relationships, unconscious entanglement means living not as yourself, but as a function of another's shadow. The empath at first cannot see this. They believe they are choosing love, when in reality they are choosing to abandon themselves for the illusion of love. The breaking point is when the veil lifts, when they see, often with painful clarity, that caring endlessly has not healed the narcissist, but has only emptied themselves. And this awakening is not gentle. It is often accompanied by guilt. Am I selfish for pulling away? Am I cruel for no longer trying? These questions torment the empath because they strike at the core of their identity. But slowly, steadily, another voice begins to rise beneath the guilt. A voice that whispers, "Your life is not theirs to devour. Your soul is not a sacrifice." This is the moment of psychic rebellion. The empath realizes that continuing to care without boundaries is not love, it is bondage. And true love, as Jung would insist, cannot exist without freedom. So the empath begins to detach, not out of hate, but out of self-preservation. What once looked like selfishness is, in truth, the beginning of individuation. The narcissist, of course, senses this shift and fights against it. They accuse the empath of being cold, of having changed, of betraying the bond. But deep down, the empath knows the truth. Nothing has changed except the refusal to die for someone else's comfort. The breaking point is not the end of compassion. It is the beginning of balance. And once reached, there is no going back, because the empath has tasted the possibility of freedom, the possibility of existing not as a mirror, not as a savior, but as a whole person. And that taste, once discovered, cannot be forgotten. The breaking point hurts. It feels like loss. But it is also the doorway to a life where caring is a choice, not a compulsion, where love is mutual, not parasitic, where the self is no longer sacrificed on the altar of another's need. And as Carl Jung taught, every true transformation begins with such a rupture. The breaking point is not a failure. It is the beginning of individuation. When the empath reaches their breaking point and begins to detach, the narcissist's carefully constructed world begins to crumble. At first, they do not believe it. They think the silence is temporary, just another tactic. Surely, the empath will return to explain themselves, to justify their distance, to soothe the discomfort as they always have. But when the silence stretches on, something shifts. Fear begins to seep in, a fear the narcissist has spent their life covering with arrogance and control. This is the beginning of collapse, and collapse, for the narcissist, is not graceful. It erupts in stages: rage, confusion, desperation, and blame. Each stage is an attempt to regain control, to drag the empath back into the game. But none of it works because the rules have changed. The first stage is rage. The narcissist lashes out, throwing accusations like daggers. "You've changed. You're cold. You're ungrateful." These words are not random. They're carefully chosen to strike at the empath's deepest insecurities, the very traits the narcissist once exploited. If the empath can be made to feel guilty, they might return. But when the empath does not respond, the rage burns hotter and then begins to sputter. The second stage is confusion. How can you do this after everything we've shared? They pace, they brood, they obsess. Their mind cannot compute a reality where their mirror no longer reflects them. They feel exposed, vulnerable, as though the world can now see what they have always hidden, the emptiness inside. Jung called this confrontation with the shadow, and for those who have spent their lives avoiding it, the encounter is terrifying. The third stage is desperation. The narcissist, once grandiose, now clings. They may beg, plead, or suddenly show vulnerability. "I can't live without you. You're the only one who understands me." To the empath, these words might sound like love, but they are not. They are fear disguised as affection. Fear of losing control, of losing the mirror, of facing the abyss alone. The final stage is blame. Unable to accept their own fragility, the narcissist projects it back onto the empath. "You're selfish, you're cruel, you've destroyed everything." In reality, what terrifies them is not the empath's selfishness, but their refusal to be enslaved. What enrages them is not cruelty, but independence. The collapse is not about losing a partner, it is about losing a source of power. And yet, beneath all the noise, one truth remains. They are terrified of losing their mirror. For the narcissist, identity is not built from within, but borrowed from without. Without someone reflecting admiration, fear, or devotion, they don't know who they are. And when the empath steps away, the mask slips, revealing the fragile ego beneath. Jung warned that when projections fail, the psyche is forced to confront itself. This confrontation is painful, sometimes unbearable, because it exposes the wounds and emptiness that were long hidden. For the narcissist, the empath's detachment is like a sudden stripping away of armor. The persona cracks. The shadow, unacknowledged, rushes in. What follows is not strength, but collapse. The empath watching this may feel torn. Compassion whispers, "Maybe I should go back. Maybe I should help." But wisdom says otherwise. This collapse is not theirs to mend. It is the narcissist's confrontation with their own shadow, a reckoning only they can face. And so, while the narcissist rages and blames, the empath learns something profound. Their silence is more powerful than any argument. Their detachment more transformative than any sacrifice. Because when the narcissist can no longer command attention, manipulate emotion, or control the mirror, they face the one thing they have always feared: themselves.
To the empath, indifference can feel like betrayal. After a lifetime of giving, the act of no longer caring may feel harsh, even cruel. But this is the paradox. Detachment is not the death of compassion. It is the beginning of healing. It is not hate. It is freedom. When the empath stops caring in the old way, pouring endlessly into a bottomless void, they are not abandoning love, but redefining it. They are reclaiming the truth that love without boundaries is not love at all, but servitude. Jung understood this as the withdrawal of projections. When we stop projecting our own ideals, fears, and hopes onto another, we reclaim that psychic energy for ourselves. The empath, in detaching, is not becoming cold. They are becoming whole. This shift feels radical. For so long, the empath's identity was tied to rescuing, to giving, to proving their worth through sacrifice. But the moment of detachment reveals a deeper possibility. Worth does not need to be proven. Existence is already complete. Love does not require chains, and caring does not mean erasing oneself. The freedom of detachment begins quietly. The empath no longer feels compelled to explain themselves, no longer spends sleepless nights drafting imaginary conversations, no longer justifies every choice to avoid conflict. The silence that once felt heavy now feels light. What was once a battlefield becomes, at last, a clearing. And with that clearing comes clarity. The empath begins to see how much of their energy was consumed in the service of another's shadow. They notice how their laughter had dimmed, how their dreams had been postponed, how their very sense of self had been shrunk to fit inside someone else's story. Detachment restores these pieces, slowly, like light returning after a long storm. The narcissist, of course, will interpret this detachment as cruelty. They will say, "You've become selfish, unfeeling, hard." But in truth, the empath has become free. Because what the narcissist calls selfish is simply the refusal to bleed for another's comfort. What they call unfeeling is simply the decision to stop being manipulated. What they call hard is the strength of boundaries long overdue. Carl Jung often spoke of individuation as the journey of becoming who you truly are, not who others demand you to be. For the empath, detachment is individuation in action. It is the conscious choice to no longer serve as a vessel for someone else's unacknowledged shadow. It is the act of gathering back their scattered energy, their forgotten desires, their silenced voice. It is the discovery that self-respect is not arrogance, but the foundation of any genuine love. And here lies the paradox. By no longer caring in the compulsive, self-erasing way, the empath gains the capacity to care in a healthier, freer way. Compassion without chains, love without self-destruction, presence without dependence. The freedom of detachment is not the end of empathy. It is empathy finally directed inward. It is the recognition that one's own soul is worthy of the same patience, care, and understanding once lavished on others. It is the realization that saving yourself is not betrayal. It is the first act of true loyalty. And as Jung's insights remind us, the soul cannot flourish when it is enslaved to another's unconscious. Liberation begins with withdrawal, with silence, with the choice not to feed the shadow. The empath, in detaching, discovers that indifference is not the absence of love. It is the boundary that allows real love to exist. It is the highest form of self-respect, the recognition that your energy, your soul, your life are not currency to be spent on someone else's emptiness. This is the freedom of detachment. And it is the turning point where the empath ceases to be a mirror and begins to be a self. We return to the silence. The narcissist sits in the void they once filled with noise, demands, accusations, pleas, but now none of it matters. The empath no longer responds, no longer fuels the performance, and in that silence, two very different realities emerge. For the narcissist, the silence is suffocating because it exposes the emptiness they can no longer hide. But for the empath, the silence is liberation. It is space. It is air.
This is the paradox Jung understood. What destroys one person can set another free. The same silence that terrifies the narcissist is the silence that heals the empath. Because silence is not absence, it is presence. The presence of self, the presence of clarity, the presence of a soul reclaimed from years of unconscious sacrifice. The empath, standing in this new freedom, realizes something profound. They were never powerless. The chains that bound them were not forged from steel, but from belief. The belief that they had to save, to endure, to give without end. By breaking that belief, they break the chain. And what remains is not cruelty, but balance. Jung would call this the integration of the shadow. The empath, by withdrawing from the narcissist's demands, is not simply escaping pain. They are facing their own unconscious patterns, the compulsion to rescue, the fear of abandonment, the identification with sacrifice. To detach is to shine light on these shadows and to choose differently. It is to recognize that love without boundaries is not love, that care without reciprocity is exploitation, that silence, once feared, is in fact the sound of individuation. Individuation is the path toward wholeness. It is the journey of no longer living as a fragment of someone else's story, but as the author of your own. For the empath, this means realizing that their sensitivity, their depth, their capacity for care are not curses to be exploited, but gifts to be guarded. It means learning that their soul does not exist to be consumed, it exists to be lived. The narcissist, left without a mirror, may rage, may collapse, may search for a new source of validation. But that is no longer the empath's concern. Detachment is not about punishing the narcissist. It is about refusing to participate in a game that was never loved to begin with. It is about stepping out of the unconscious contract and into conscious freedom. The silence grows, but now it feels different. For the empath, it is no longer the silence of defeat, but the silence of peace. No more explaining, no more sacrificing, no more shrinking. Just stillness, and within that stillness, strength. This is where the story ends, and where life truly begins. The empath walks forward, lighter, clearer, untouchable, not because they have become harder, but because they have become whole. They no longer need to carry the narcissist's shadow, because they have embraced their own. They no longer need to play savior, because they have chosen to be themselves. And so the final truth reveals itself. When the empath stops caring, the narcissist loses control. But the empath? The empath gains their soul back.